Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to case number 9455. On December 18th, 2017, Delmarva, on behalf of the parties, filed with the Commission a joint motion for approval of agreement of unanimous stipulation and settlement in this proceedings. We are conducting an evidentiary hearing today to consider that settlement agreement. We've received testimony from Delmarva, OPC, and staff in support of the settlement. So I don't think we need to take appearances. Why don't we begin? And let me, Mr. Wilson, unless you have any opening comments, we'll turn it over to the applicants.
That would be fine, Your Honor.
All right, very good.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for being here. I do have a couple of exhibits, and I would like to enter into evidence the testimony of Delmarva Power, if that would be appropriate. I've given the Executive Secretary a copy of the Notice of Publication of Advertisements of the public hearings, and I'd ask that those be marked as Delmarva Power Exhibit 2.
We will mark this DPL 2.
The next piece of testimony, first piece of testimony, I'd ask that Mr. McGowan's direct testimony be marked as Delmarva Power Exhibit 3.
Okay, this is his direct settlement testimony. Is that what you're...
No, his direct testimony.
Okay.
I was going to do all of his testimonies seriatim, so his settlement testimony will be coming up, Your Honor.
Okay, so we're going to bring... Well, let me ask you this. Are you planning on bringing in every witness's testimony into evidence?
Yes, Your Honor.
And we're going to start with Mr. McGowan.
Yes. It was part of the settlement, and I want to make sure that we have record evidence.
Okay.
So McGowan direct would be Exhibit 3. McGowan rebuttal would be Delmarva Power Exhibit 4. McGowan settlement testimony would be Delmarva Power Exhibit 5. Brian Clark's direct testimony would be Delmarva Power Exhibit 6.
Okay, give me just a sec.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Exhibit 6 is Clark.
Direct.
Okay.
Clark rebuttal would be Exhibit 7.
Okay.
Zeminski direct would be Exhibit 8. Zeminski supplemental direct would be Exhibit 9. Zeminski rebuttal would be Exhibit 10. McAvoy direct would be Exhibit 11. McAvoy supplemental direct would be Exhibit 12. McAvoy rebuttal would be Exhibit 13. Santa Cecilia direct would be Exhibit 14.
Wait, hang on a sec. McAvoy, what was Exhibit 12 again?
McAvoy supplemental direct.
Okay.
Then Exhibit 13 was her rebuttal testimony,
Right.
Your Honor.
Okay. And 14?
Santa Cecilia direct. SANTACECILIA.
Okay.
Exhibit 15 would be Santa Cecilia rebuttal. Exhibit 16 would be Mr. Hevert's direct testimony. Exhibit 17 would be Mr. Hevert's rebuttal testimony. And finally, Delmarva Power Exhibit 18 would be Mr. Weinstein's direct testimony.
Okay, are we bringing in you want to bring in the application itself? Or is that part of?
I hadn't contemplated bringing in the application.
Okay, that's fine.
Did you want me to put Mr. McGowan up on the stand at this time, or?
Yes.
Oh.
Why don't we bring him
Okay.
up?
Then, with that, Your Honor, Delmarva Power would call Mr. Kevin McGowan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Swear the witness in.
Please affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter pending is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I did.
Mr. McGowan, have you caused to be filed what's been marked for purposes of identification as McGowan Settlement Testimony, Delmarva Power Exhibit 5?
Yes, I have.
And if I asked you those questions contained in your testimony, are your answers true and correct?
Yes, they are.
Do you have any corrections or additions that you need to make to this testimony?
I do not.
Do you have any further comments that you'd like to make regarding the settlement?
With the testimony of the parties that filed as well?
Yes.
Yes. So I would agree with the testimonies filed by both staff and OPC witnesses. Staff witness Smith states the settlement is reasonable and in the public interest. OPC witness Efron states the settlement is reasonable and justified, so we appreciate their support in the settlement. However, there is one comment I would like to make related to the testimony of staff witness Zhang. The company does not agree with the characterization made by Mr. Zhang on page 9, lines 17 through 19 of his testimony related to an errata filing made by the company. The company made a mistake. It was a clerical error in Table 3 of Witness Clark's testimony, and we filed an errata promptly when the error was identified. Staff witness Zhang asserts that after he inquired about the data in the table, the company promptly made changes to our plan to lower the actual benefits, and this was not the case. I would emphasize that the differences in opinion on this has no impact on the settlement. The parties have agreed to establish a working group to further evaluate the settlement, the reliability spending, and the reliability benefits of Delmarva Power, and we'll be able to work through our differences on that issue and any other questions they have. We have a great story to tell for Delmarva, Maryland, and we look forward to working with staff and OPC to dig into more details and to show that our reliability plan is cost justified. That's it.
With that, Your Honor, I would move the admission of Delmarva Power Exhibits 1 through 18 into the record, and I would tender Mr. McGowan for cross and questions from the Commission.
Any objection?
No objections.
No objections.
DPL 2 through 18 are admitted. Okay, any cross for this witness?
No questions, Your Honor.
No cross.
All right, very good. We'll go to questions from the bench. And so, Mr. McGowan, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. Just had a couple questions. Well, first let me ask you. This is a black box settlement. Would that be accurate?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So, one question I had, and maybe this is the mechanics of how this black box settlement works in terms of a future rate case. In Delmarva, so as part of this rate case, am I correct that there's also Delmarva is seeking some post-test year reliability spending recovery? Is that correct? At least as submitted to the Commission?
Sure. So as part of the company's original application, we sought recovery of post-test period reliability expenditures similar to what we've done in the past. The parties evaluated those expenditures, and we came to different. Each party had different ways to get to the $13.4 million, but those were considered in that black box settlement. But there's no description or disclosure as to what was included.
Okay. So in Delmarva's next rate case, is it possible? How would this post-test year reliability spending potentially be treated? Could it come back up in another rate case, or would it be considered addressed in this rate case?
Sure. So the way it would work in a subsequent rate case, and similar to how it would be addressed in any rate case that wasn't a black box settlement, in the next rate case, we will present to you the capital spent to date, and we may actually request for some post-test period capital in that rate case. And that will set the revenue requirement that the company is seeking for, given that point in time, the capital that it's spent, and the post-test period capital. And you would measure the revenue requirement at that time versus what's currently in rates. So the fact that post-test period capital may or may not be disclosed in this rate case is not necessarily relevant for the next rate case.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to also ask you about the provision requiring the work group to look at Delmarva's reliability spend and projected reliability performance. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask our staff witness about this too, but wanted to get from you a sense of the timing of how what work's going to be done and who's doing it and how is that going to proceed.
Sure.
And let me ask you first, as part of that, will the company be doing an initial review that it's going to then give to the work group, or is this something where the work group's just going to hit the ground running should this settlement be approved?
Sure. So the details of how the work group will proceed will be worked out, I assume, in the first kind of kickoff meeting. But it's our kind of understanding that it's on the company to present the reliability spend and the reliability benefits in our reliability plan to the working group. We think we understand the issues that staff has raised in terms of how they're looking at the metrics and comparing DPL to PEPCO. We believe we can demonstrate and show them why there's a difference and help them understand why the metrics at DPL Maryland are different and why you really can't align them completely with PEPCO Maryland. So it's up to us to make that first presentation, and our hope is that we'll respond to questions from the working group and try to resolve our issues. If a consultant is needed, we've agreed to fund up to $150,000 of the consultant if that's needed.
And when would so Delmarva would present its findings to the work group by October 31st, 2018, or 45 days prior to the filing of the next rate case. Is that correct?
No. So the working group will present our findings. We need to start as soon as possible. So that process will start in the next month or two. The working group, the conclusion of the working group would be 45 days prior to the filing of a rate case, or October 31st.
Or the conclusion of the work group's evaluation.
That's right. So once we go through the evaluation of the information, Delmarva has agreed to file a report with the working group based on the findings of the working group at that time. But the plan would be that it would sort of wrap up by October 31st.
Oh, okay. So how soon do you think a decision will be made about this consultant, and how quickly could a consultant be brought on board to assist the work group?
Our opinion is we don't believe a consultant is needed. We think we've got a good story. We think we can be compelling in our in how we get through this. It's really up to staff if they believe that they need a consultant, given kind of what they're hearing and their workload. But that's really up to them to decide.
Okay, and so is your understanding then the consultant would actually be something the commission staff would procure?
We haven't worked out the procurement procedures. The settlement says that the Delmarva would select the consultant with the approval of the other parties.
Okay, so this might be something that Delmarva actually would procure the services of the consultant.
We'd have to work through the working group to decide how that would be resolved.
All right, because if the commission does it, some experience in getting consultants on board, I think there's going to be a bit of a time lag, just in our process with approval, through state government. So,
okay.
Something to be aware of. Okay, I think that's all my questions. Let me turn it over to my colleagues. We'll start with Commissioner Richard, then Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah, I was also just interested in the consultant and how this work group would, what its purpose and how it would work. So the $150,000, that is not going to be paid for by the company, if I understand correctly. That'll actually then later be paid by the ratepayers. Is that what the plan is? It will go into rate pays?
That's correct. So the company has agreed to initially fund it, and it would be recoverable through rates in a future rate case.
Okay, and these consultants, are they, if I'm reading this correctly, this is more to benefit commission staff, OPC staff. Is that correct? Or, I mean, who would benefit most from this this consultant?
Sure. So it was a resource for staff, given their workload, given if they need additional expertise. So it's really for the benefit of staff in the working group.
Okay, and is it just DPL focused, or would there be additional benefit just overall to understanding the reliability spends for both PEPCO and DPL?
So the focus is really why the spending, the reliability spending at DPL Maryland is different than the reliability spending at PEPCO Maryland. So the focus was just on those two companies. It is really a Delmarva Maryland focused study using PEPCO Maryland as sort of a benchmark for metrics.
Okay. I think most of these questions are probably more for staff, but I'm just interested to hear your perspective. The other, I'm just trying to understand on the issue of the bill impact. There's just a lot of different numbers between your testimony and the staff. On your testimony, it appears that you're stating that there's a $2.71 impact, or 1.9%. Then in staff, it looks like they're estimating more like 4%. But overall, this is a 4.9 or a 5% increase in distribution charges that will be assessed to the residential class. Can you just help me reconcile all these different numbers? What is the impact of this? Is it 4%?
Sure.
4%, 9%? Are you trying to mitigate maybe reductions in commodity charges with increases in the distribution charges as sort of just an offset?
Right. So the typical residential customer uses about 980 kilowatts, and based on that, the settlement is it's a $2.71 per month impact on the residential customer, which is about a 1.9% on the total bill. On the distribution bill, it's about 6.4. So you look at just the distribution. The distribution is about 6.4. I did read the 4%. I was trying to find that in. If you can refer me to which staff testimony, I can probably help.
Page 3 of Mr. Hoppick's.
That's correct.
Okay.
Line 4.
I'm looking at it. Looks like they use 1,000 kilowatts as their baseline.
And that's part of the difference.
Okay. But really, this is a 5%, a 4.9% increase in distribution charges overall. That's what we're looking at.
I'm sorry, one more time.
This is a 4.9% increase in distribution energy charges for Class R. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I believe if using 1,000 kilowatt hours.
Well, it's the line right above on page 3.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the right page here. Give me 1 second, sorry.
Energy charges.
There we go. Yeah, I'd have to go back and take a look. I know he's talking about distribution energy charges. I'm not sure if that's the number I cited was for a total bill basis.
Yeah, no, I understand. Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Just a quick question. Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask something about the work group as well, and that is, what is the deliverable on that work group? It doesn't really specify. Is it a report? Is it a recommendation? Is it making staff feel comfortable that they can sleep at night? What is the deliverable if we're going to pay $150,000 possibly?
Sure. So the purpose of the work group is to help the parties understand why, to look at the spending, the reliability spending at Delmarva, Maryland, relative to the benefits that we're projecting and when we're committed to make through 2020. When they look at their metrics on spending versus reliability benefits, it's different than Pepco, Maryland. They raise some questions as to why it's more expensive to have reliability expenditures given the benefits in Delmarva, Maryland versus Pepco. And so the working group is to help understand what we're spending the reliability on, what the challenges and limitations we have with the network at Delmarva, Maryland, why we don't have those challenges in the Pepco system, and just better help the parties better understand what we're spending the money on relative to the benefits. And so at the end of that process, Delmarva will provide a report to the working group which summarizes the activities of that working group over that period of time. And the consultant is being hired to help, if needed, to help staff as a resource to help understand and go through the information we provide and ask any questions they need to ask.
So there will be a report produced.
Delmarva has committed
Is it
to.
filed with the commission?
It's to be filed with the working group.
Filed
There's
with
no
the-
commission.
How does the commission get it?
I assume that staff could provide a copy of the report to the commission.
And might there be recommendations in that report?
There could be.
So this work group could produce recommendations, but we got to kind of try to find it. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Linton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. McGowan. I had a couple of questions related to your opening comments, and I thank you for those, also related to the work group. On page 10 of Staff Witness Zong's testimony, he references the role the consultant would play in the work group. And it appears as though the trigger for requiring a consultant would be under the condition, perhaps there are other conditions, but at least under the condition in the testimony that the company would be unable to provide sufficient transparency related to the cost effectiveness of the reliability planning. So your earlier comments, you mentioned that you believe the company had a good story to tell and that there was information available for the staff and the OPC to review. So do you foresee any challenges or any reason why the company be unable to provide the information that staff and OPC needs in order to conduct this review?
There's nothing that comes to mind that I can think of. I think part of the challenge in a rate case, it's time bound, and a lot of the questions are through discovery and questions and answers. A lot of times when it comes to these types of issues, you just need to sit down informally and kind of work through and have people explain why there are differences and help dive deeper into the numbers that you may not have time available in a rate case. So there's nothing that I can say that is going to prohibit us from helping them understand. I think it's just really a matter of being able to have the resources and time to do it.
Okay. So I think it's based on what I'm hearing today, then it sounds as though it's just a matter of having the opportunity to work everything out, and so the consultant ultimately may not be needed at all.
That's our position, yes. We believe we can work through this and explain the differences without the need for a consultant.
Okay. All right. My second question relates to your testimony on page 6. This is question 10 related to the class cost of service study. At that place, you're referencing offering some training and education to the staff in the Office of People's Counsel. Could you tell me just a little bit more about how you plan on envision that going forward, or what's contained in that process?
Sure. So the class cost of service model we use, it's a proprietary model, and we've used it for 20 years, from what I understand, a long time. And as people want more transparency on how some of the information is prepared and the model produces the allocations, there's a challenge trying to get access to the formulas because it's a proprietary model. And so what we agreed to do is sit down with staff and OPC. We can bring in the developers of the software to help kind of walk them through and help train them on how the model works. Our staff's available. We've offered to have people come into our office for a couple of days and train on the model. So it's really just trying to help them better understand how to use the model. We've reached out to the software vendor to see if there's an opportunity to give staff and OPC a non-proprietary access to it, so they don't have maybe there's a separate model they can use that doesn't have all the detail, but they would be able to play with the numbers to see how things work. So it's really just trying to help them better understand how the model works and just trying to be more transparent in how those allocations are done.
Okay. So your testimony references that there may be there's two different options that you could follow, either granting direct access or providing software that doesn't employ proprietary information or function. So taking a cue from some of the earlier testimony that kind of suggests, and I don't want to bound anybody to this, but suggests that there may be another rate case filed sometime in 2018. How will all of this happen prior to, or maybe I should ask the question in a different way, will all of this happen prior to the filing of another rate case in the future?
Sure. Our plan, I believe there's adequate time to go through and help train staff and OPC on how the model works, work with the vendors, see if they can provide access to it. And so I think there's adequate time this year to do that before we file the next rate case for Delmarva, Maryland.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. I appreciate you indulging me to a follow-up.
No problem.
So recently, in other proceedings, work groups have had mixed success in some instances. Proceedings not related to rate cases necessarily, but where consensus couldn't be reached by either the stakeholders or the parties participating, which presents challenges to the Commission. What happens in this instance if there is no consensus reached on this work group?
Well, in my opinion, I'm not sure a consensus needs to be reached. The purpose of the work group, it would be great if at the end there was clear understanding and we all were in agreement. I think the real purpose of the work group is an understanding of the numbers and having the time to drill down into more detail about the numbers. And it provides information for staff and other parties in our next rate case to be able to have a better position and be better informed on how to form their position in the next rate case. But it's really more about, it would be great if we could reach consensus and have an agreement on it, but it's really more about education and just trying to make sure everyone has a better understanding of the numbers and what they mean and how they compare between Delmarva, Maryland and Pepco, Maryland.
I understand. I understand that the company has one position and staff has a different position, and it's try an attempt to reconcile those different perspectives. But I'm still trying to figure out what the deliverable is, and what happens if that reconciliation of understanding doesn't occur.
Right. So the deliverable is Delmarva, Maryland will produce a report to the working group at the end, which summarizes and tries to summarize the activities of the working group and the information we provided. The actual report, we have to kind of work through the format of it, but it should advance the topic substantially over the next 7 or 8 months and help people better understand the information that we put in the report. But it should lay out the cost, the cost that companies incurred. It'll explain why there's differences between DPL and Pepco in Maryland. And at the end, it'll be an information document that if staff and OPC agree with, that's great. If they don't, then they have a basis to start with something and say at least limit or focus on where their areas of disagreement are.
And the work group's being led by the staff?
I believe that's correct.
But Delmarva's hiring the consultant, Delmarva's producing the report.
Well, Delmarva, Maryland is funding the consultant. Bear with me 1 second.
If I may, we would be hiring the consultant with the approval of staff when you look at paragraph 4C.
Thank you.
Yeah. And staff, the way it's led is that staff will convene the working group, and we would we'll work with them. We'll work with OPC, but we would look to staff to kind of lead their working group and run the working group.
I appreciate it. I don't want to harp on a small thing, but people came together in good faith efforts in some of the work groups in PC 44, and they weren't able to reach consensus, and it was challenging in some instances. So. I just want to make sure I understand how this whole process is going to work for if we are to pre-approve a $150,000 expenditure.
Right. Understood.
Thank you.
Mr. McGowan, one follow-up. So, does Delmarva Power and Light have any plans at this point in 2018 to file its next rate case?
We have made no decision on our next rate case. As you know, we've generally been on a 12 to 15-month cycle, but if there is any rate case, it will not be till much later in the year, if at all.
Thank you. Appreciate
Okay.
your testimony very much. Mr. McKeel, am I correct? We have not brought into evidence the December 18th joint motion for approval of the stipulation and settlement and exhibits.
We have not, Your Honor. I'd be happy to get that marked as I would recommend Joint Exhibit 1 and put that into evidence if that's what you would like to do, sir.
I would like to do that, so why don't we mark that as joint exhibit?
And
Joint exhibit 1?
we will provide copies of that after the hearing. I apologize. I don't have
That's right,
the 6.
we should all have them.
Okay.
It's fine. That is marked and without objection admitted. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, next, we will go to the Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. William Fields for the Office of People's Counsel. I will ask to mark our pre-filed testimony as well as our supplemental testimony on the settlement. So I would request to mark as OPC Exhibit 1 the direct testimony of David Efron, filed on October 16th. There's a public and a confidential version, so I'd ask to mark the public version as Exhibit 1 and the confidential version as Exhibit 1C.
Okay.
I'd also like to ask to mark the supplemental testimony of David Efron on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel dated January 2nd as OPC Exhibit 2. I'd like to mark the direct testimony of Carl Pavlovic, Pavlovic, filed on October 16th as OPC Exhibit 3.
Okay.
The direct testimony of Dr. J. Randall Woolridge, filed on October 16th as OPC Exhibit 4. And the direct testimony of Peter J. Lanzalata, filed on October 16th as OPC Exhibit 5. I'll also note for the record that a errata version of the confidential direct testimony of Mr. Efron was filed on November the 1st. However, that was only to add page numbers to the confidential document. So I don't think we need to worry about that.
Okay.
So OPC would move for admission OPC Exhibits 1, 1C, and 2 through 5.
Without objection,
No objection.
OPC 1, 1C, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are admitted.
And also thank the Commission for allowing us to put in Mr. Efron's testimony without his appearance here today.
Right. Okay, next we'll go to Commission staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Staff would also ask to be marked its direct testimony as well as its settlement testimony for today, starting with the direct testimony of Jamie A. Smith, which all of this direct testimony was filed on October 16th, and we would ask that that be Staff Exhibit 1.
Okay.
The direct testimony and exhibits of Felix L. Patterson, Staff Exhibit 2.
Why don't we take, is that all we have for Mr. Smith?
Well, we have his settlement
Why
testimony
don't we bring that
today.
in as next? So
Okay.
That'll be
but then
exhibit-
that would be
staff 2
staff 2.
would be Mr. Smith's settlement testimony. Okay.
We have the direct testimony of Felix Patterson, which would then be staff 3. The direct testimony of Philip Vanderhayden would be staff 4. The direct testimony of Drew McAuliffe, which would be staff 5. The direct testimony of David Hoppick, which would be staff 6. And following that would be the settlement testimony of David Hoppick, which would be staff 7. We have the direct testimony of Kevin Zong, Z-H-O-N-G, which would be staff 8. And that would be followed by the settlement testimony of Kevin Zong, which would be staff 9. And if there's no objection, I would move all of staff 1 through 9 into evidence. I might also note that following the October 16th testimony of Mr. Zong's direct testimony, some additional exhibits were filed the following day on October 17th, and I would request that they be included as part of Exhibit 6.
Part of 6, okay. Okay, staff exhibits 1 through 9 are marked and without objection admitted. Who would staff like to bring up first?
We would call David Hoppick
Okay.
first, Your Honor.
Please swear and affirm under the perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter of offending is the truth, the truth.
I do.
Yeah, moving my voice. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Hoppick. Could you state your position with staff?
Yes, I am the Assistant Director of the Electricity Division.
And in that capacity, did you prepare and cause to be filed on January 2nd the testimony that's entitled Settlement Testimony and Exhibits of David Hoppick?
I did.
Do you have any corrections or additions to that testimony?
I do not.
And does this remain your testimony and in your belief is true and correct as of today?
Yes.
With that, Your Honor, I would pass the witness for cross-examination and questioning.
Right, very good. First of all, any cross-examination for this witness?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
So we will go to questions from the bench. Mr. Hoppick, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. I just had a couple questions for you. One is I wanted to make sure I understood your testimony on the settlement's impact on large commercial rates and residential rates in terms of percentage increase. Could you go over that with me?
Okay. So, in my testimony, I give a specific number for the both the bill impact of a residential customer and the increase in the distribution energy charge. If you turn to my exhibit DH Settlement 2, you can see that the customer charge for the residential class increases about 1.6%, and the energy charges, both the winter distribution energy charge and the summer energy distribution energy charge increase about 4.9%. And then turning to Exhibit DH Settlement 3, this is the very last page. This shows the residential bill impact. And so you can see it for a range of consumption, and the specific level at which I quote in the testimony is for a customer consuming 1,000 kilowatt hours in a month. So.
Okay, thank you. So is it fair then to say that large commercial rates would increase, and this is just, I guess, on the distribution as a percent of their distribution costs, by more than residential, by roughly in the 10% range? Would that be right?
Yes, I believe those are the. Hold on a moment, please. So, so general service secondary large and general service primary are the two commercial classes included in step 1.
Right.
And so their increases in revenue are about, as you said, about 10%. So I did not include, a figure for that, but yes, no, I think it's safe to say it's around 10% for the distribution bill impacts.
Thank you. So why does staff think that's an appropriate, I guess, balance between commercial and residential, the large commercial, that 10% versus 6%? Given that certainly in Delmarva service territory, economic development is a very important issue.
So I'm going to turn to my direct testimony to answer that question. Give me a moment.
Sure.
So, I'll find a good exhibit. All right. Okay. Exhibit DH2A in my direct testimony. I'll give you some time to find that.
2A?
Yes.
I'm there.
Okay. So this shows the allocation for the rate classes. This was based on the initial cost of service study provided by the company. It was updated, and these numbers did change a bit, but I would point to the fact that the large general service secondary class has a unitized rate of return of approximately 0.7, and then the general service primary class actually had a negative rate of return of negative 0.6. So the numbers were updated to actual. In addition, Delmarva made a change to the cost of service study, basically where they averaged over 3 years. I don't want to get too far into that because I didn't testify on it, but that did adjust things as well. So after all that, the large general service and general service primary classes were still, in terms of the unitized rates of return, quite a bit lower than the residential class, which was right about 1 after all of this. So that's why in my direct testimony, I selected 6% as step one, such that the increase for these under-earning classes, which are a fair amount below a unitized rate of return of 1, was not disproportionately higher than, say, on a percentage basis than the increase for the residential class and the other classes.
Thank you. Appreciate you answering my questions. Commissioner Richard.
I have a similar question, again, about just the overall impact. So looking at the various numbers you're used, if you would just give I guess a base number, the increase is about a 6.8% increase in the distribution, I guess, compared to the previous rates. Is that about correct?
I believe so,
That's the
yes.
result. Okay. Yeah. I have to say, we did do a few public hearings, and I was struck by Janet Lewis, who appeared at one of the hearings, and she talked really about these impacts on the Eastern Shore, and the fact that they're coming quite frequently. And she specifically points out, on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, these rate increases hurt our businesses. They cause businesses not to be able to expand or even to open. We have many citizens on the Eastern Shore that are on fixed incomes. We have families that are struggling. And it also affects schools, and she kind of goes on just talking about that. When you're looking at an appropriate and reasonable increase, do you take the local economy? Are staff looking at not just what's happening nationwide or what generally is happening with other utilities? And I know that's getting more to the return on equity and things like that, but really the overall impact when coming up with a reasonable increase, given that other businesses, the rest of the economy is not growing that quickly. People aren't getting 6.8% increases. Is that being taken into consideration?
So, what I'm primarily looking to do is balance the need to meet whatever the revenue requirement that staff comes up with, the need to try and slowly, gradually bring classes to a unitized rate of return of 1, with making sure that individual customers across all classes do not see very significant impacts. So looking at the percentages for the full range of residential customers. So in my exhibits, there's generally, especially for the residential class, the distribution bill impact, someone consuming just 100 kilowatt hours a month, 200, 300, so forth, up to, say, 3,000, and making sure that that increase does not, there's not a group within that, say, low consumption customers, high consumption customers that are getting, say, 2 or 3 times or much different on a percentage basis than the other classes, to attempt to keep things gradual across all customers.
Yeah.
So I mean that's focusing on gradualism and trying to make sure that there's not a particular customer across all rate classes to the degree as possible that gets, say, a 30% increase in their distribution bill while someone else is getting a 5. That is one of my major goals.
And I appreciate that answer, and I know we're having a very abbreviated opportunity to have these questions. I was looking at a kind of a broader, concept here that we aren't otherwise exploring about, again, weighing overall economics with what a utility is coming in. And since these utilities are coming in on a very frequent basis, that we are, in fact, taking the overall economic impact of these rate cases. So I appreciate you're very specific, but I was, I guess, getting to a more broader point, especially since we're looking at this settlement. I also wanted to ask about the customer charges. I appreciate it is going to, I think, it's being held at 1.6%. Is it still the staff position, though, that we need to be very careful with when we consider customer charges, that they may be contradictory to other Maryland objectives, such as the, promoting RPS, solar energy on the residential level, and the Empower energy conservation objectives as well. This is, again, a very modest increase. But again, if we're going to be looking at doing this frequently, our staff still concerned that we may be having a contradictory impact on these other important state objectives?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we, in my initial direct testimony, I advocated for a 2.84% increase approximately, which is what the Commission has approved in multiple recent cases. I did note that it was a little lower for the most recent PEPCO case at, I believe, about 2.6% for the residential class. So as part of what we were hoping to get during the process was as much as possible keeping that customer charge, especially for the residential class, low, such that most of the increase in revenue came from the distribution energy charge, such that people can specifically control their distribution bill through things like energy efficiency if they wanted to use net metering and so forth. So that was an enormous focus.
Okay, good. So that's still the position of staff that we should be very conscious of, again, having offsetting policies here. One, if we continue to push the customer charge, but on the other hand, still expect customers to be motivated to save energy on the other hand. So we probably do need, if we're going to have frequent rate cases and this demand or service charge is going to be, customer charge is going to be considered, we probably need to take that into account. Is that?
Yes. So, I mean, I think if you're going to be having rate cases every year, setting increases approximately equal to a rate of inflation, which, I did look at some Bureau of Labor Statistics data on, I might be misquoting the federal agency I looked at, but I looked at inflation data, and it definitely was approximately about that 1.6% and lower than the 2.6, 2.84% that we had been looking at prior. So, I think going forward, especially for utilities that are coming in on approximately an annual basis, staff will be looking at keeping customer charges, especially for the residential class, increasing approximately the rate of inflation.
Great. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Don.
I have to engage the inflation discussion, but good morning, Mr. Hoppick. I have no questions for you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Linton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Hoppick. I just had one question related to rate making adjustment 21. It's actually in witness Smith's testimony, but I was just curious as to whether or not, and I don't know if you could tell me as a result of the settlement, but could you tell me if that adjustment was applied exclusively to the residential class, or was it spread across all of the classes?
I do not know.
Okay.
If it contributed to the $13.4 million, let me please revise my answer. Assuming it is part of the $13.4 million revenue increase, that $13.4 million revenue increase, all of that went through the two-step method, such that it was allocated across all classes. But I would defer to Witness Smith on the specifics of how that relates to the $13.4 million.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hoppick. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, who's next?
Yes, Your Honor, we would call Jamie Smith for staff.
You swear and affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Smith, would you state your position with staff?
I am the director of the accounting division.
And in that capacity, did you cause to be prepared and filed on January 2nd the settlement testimony of Jamie A. Smith?
I did.
And do you have that before you now?
I do.
And do you have any corrections or additions to that testimony?
I do not.
And does this remain your testimony that you're sponsoring today?
I do.
With that, Your Honor, I would pass him for cross-examination and questioning by the Commission.
Okay, any cross?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right, we'll go to questions from the bench. Good morning, Mr. Smith. Always good to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
I just had really one question, and that is, in your view, are there any, I guess, contested adjustments in this settlement that deviated from the treatment of a similar item in the Pepco rate case?
I would say the number that we ultimately decided on took into account the decisions in the Pepco case.
Okay. And in terms of, I think, since this is a black box settlement, there was some decision, I think, this commission made in the Pepco case, where there were similar requests in Delmarva that went into that black box, like it's sort of like a black hole. We don't know what happened once it went in, correct? So are those and if one item comes to my mind is SERP. Is that an issue that staff anticipates will be coming back in subsequent rate cases?
I don't know the answer to that, but it may. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But
I think that's all. In terms of the winter storm, looking at winter storm Stella and the amortizing over 5 years, I'm correct. That's the same treatment that the commission gave.
That is correct.
Okay, very good.
all the regulatory assets are in there are pretty similar to what was decided in the Pepco case.
All right, very good. Thank you for your testimony,
Thank you.
Commissioner Richard.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any additional questions.
Commissioner.
Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. No, Commissioner O'Donnell, I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you the same question a little bit differently than the chairman asked you, and that is the rate-making adjustments. Were there rate-making adjustments that we had previously denied or previously approved that are not part of this? In other words, were rejected or included for other reasons with regard to the Pepco case?
As I discussed with the chairman, those decisions in the Pepco case were definitely thoroughly discussed and included into getting to the final revenue requirement number.
Yeah, but so I'm asking about the policy decisions that are embedded in the rate adjustments and whether or not by accepting or rejecting this settlement agreement, we would be changing our previously held policy in an affiliates case that's been recently decided by us.
I would say no. The answer to that is no. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Linton.
Yes, good morning.
Good
Mr.
morning.
Smith. The chairman actually asked the one question that I had, and I received some clarification on the different question, so I don't have anything further. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony.
Thank you again, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony.
Your Honor, Mr. Zong apparently was unable to join us this morning because of a weather-related problem. However, staff proposes to provide Mr. Borkowski, John Borkowski, the chief engineer, who can speak to Mr. Zong's testimony.
Okay, first let me ask the council any objections to Mr. Borkowski substituting.
No, Your
All
Honor.
right, very good. Let's bring him up.
Do you swear and affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Borkowski, could you state your position with the staff, please?
Yes, I'm chief engineer responsible for the engineering division.
And as chief engineer, are you the supervisor of Kevin Zong?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with what has been entered into evidence as Staff Exhibit 9, which is the settlement testimony of Kevin Zong, which was filed on January 2nd, 2018?
Yes, I am.
Was that prepared under your supervision?
Yes, it was.
And did you participate in the preparation of that testimony with Mr. Zong?
Yes, I did.
And did you have final approval of that?
Yes, I did.
Are you prepared to adopt that testimony as your own today and answer questions before the commission on that testimony?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. With that, I would offer Mr. Borkowski for questioning and cross-examination.
Okay, we'll start with any cross.
None.
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Then we'll go to questions from the bench then. Mr. Borkowski, I guess first I should say thanks for filling in. I take it on short notice. I appreciate. Let me first ask you, I assume you're familiar with Mr. Zong's testimony in the settlement?
Yes, very familiar.
Okay, very good. Let me ask a follow-up question to our question with Mr. McGowan regarding the work group and the reliability study. And I think we've heard Mr. McGowan's view that he's hopeful that the company will be able to explain exactly why there are differences in reliability spending, and that will be to the satisfaction of the work group. What do you think what do you think it's possible that the findings might tell us? Why do you think this work group is important from a staff perspective in terms of the company's reliability investments going forward?
Well, I think that the major impetus for forming the work group was the fact that we needed to understand the cost-benefit relationship, the relationship of cost to benefits for Delmarva's reliability spend much better in a much more granular fashion. I do want to state that while I agree with a majority of Mr. McGowan's previous testimony, I do think that there was a characterization about the errata, which Delmarva disagrees with, and I agree that the errata was a mistake, or at least staff feels that the errata was also a mistake. But beyond that, you have to look at the fact why was the errata changed, and basically the benefits of Delmarva's reliability spend, the benefits that you're getting from that in terms of safety improvement, were reduced dramatically. And it's not just an errata that was submitted with regards to the beginning of this rate case and then a change. The benefits were reduced from the previous rate case also. So, when you have a rather large spend, I think we demonstrated in the testimony that Delmarva has, at least with the data that we have, the largest, on a dollar per customer basis, the largest reliability spend in Maryland. So when you're talking about that large reliability spend, and then you come back and reduce the reliability benefits significantly, that is really the impetus for why we feel like we need to look into this a little bit more detail. And I do agree with Mr. McGowan's characterization that, about the conduct of the work group. We hope that Delmarva can provide reasonable explanations, and we hope that we don't have to use a consultant. But we leave the option of a consultant out there to take an independent look if we have to.
Okay, on that, it's, we're looking at a pretty tight time frame, correct, in terms of a report by the work group by this fall sometime.
Right.
And so I don't have any concerns really about this. I just wonder from a practical standpoint whether we'd actually be able to get or the work group or Delmarva would be able to get a consultant on board to really be able to have a meaningful contribution to this in such a short time frame.
I agree. It's challenging time frame, but you know, I think you heard with Mr. McGowan's testimony, they're committed to trying to get something initiated quickly on their end. I think the comments he made about Delmarva providing a view of their reliability for us in the next month or two. I don't recall the exact words, but if we can get started soon, I'm sure we can meet the timeline by October 31st.
Okay, thank you. Will, in your view, could the product of this work group and the results of the study be helpful or be used as part of the Commission's review of Rulemaking 43 and setting the next 4-year cycle of safety and safety standards?
I think it is a necessary precursor for Delmarva to understand, their spend through 2020, which is where they currently have reliability commitments. But the next cycle reliability filings will be for at least Delmarva, because they have commitments through 2020 with regards to the merger. That focus will be on 2021 through 2023, which is not the focus of this particular work group. This particular work group's focus is just trying to understand the current reliability planning and the program that Delmarva has, really to assess prudency in anticipation for any rate cases that might come forward in the future.
All right, thank you, Mr. Borkowski. Appreciate you answering my questions. Commissioner Richard?
Yeah, I think basically you answered the question. I was interested to know if there would be benefits beyond just DPL from this work group, and I think Commissioner O'Donnell was trying to get into also what exactly the work product was going to be. So you're saying this would be very, very just DPL focused and not have particularly, I'm glad you raised the whole issue of RM33.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you raised that question, because there was another point of clarification, or at least staff might have a different opinion than Delmarva. On the scope of the study, nowhere in the settlement testimony have we mentioned PEPCO as being a focus of this study. This study is about Delmarva cost reliability. In fact, during our settlement negotiations, we discussed comparing with PEPCO, but I felt that we left PEPCO out of scope. So I want to make that clarification, at least from staff's perspective. While it is true that in our testimony we used a lot of PEPCO comparisons, it was only because of the fact that we had the same reliability group at PHI producing both PEPCO and Delmarva reliability plans and analyses. But we were just using that because we were trying to have an apples-to-apples comparison. In fact, we had another comparison in our testimony of Delmarva with the rest of the state. We chose not to try to go further with other companies because of the fact that we were worried about having an apples-to-apples comparison. So that's strictly why we focused on a PEPCO comparison, but we did not intend to have PEPCO as any focus of the work group.
Okay, I see. Well, I think as you identified, these reliability spends are a significant driver for the amounts that these utilities are requesting and the frequency that they're coming in. And again, we didn't have a lot of people come to our public hearings, but we had a couple of very sophisticated statements made, I thought, at the public hearing. One was this. It was again Ms. Lewis, and she says, "It seems to me that these utilities have a great deal of impetus to do all kinds of manipulations and put all kinds of things that they say are going to make the service more reliable, because that's how they get paid. They get paid for distribution costs." And she notes our fuel costs have not gone down, but our distribution costs are going up. So it is important that that staff have that ability to do, I guess, really dig into the spending that's being done on the reliability side. Do you feel staff does have the resources now, or will we need to do more and more of these types of work groups to really dig into these reliability spends?
I feel like for in normal day-to-day business, we definitely have the staff and the expertise to conduct reviews. In a case like this, where you have to demonstrate, cost benefit at a granular level, I think that's best aided by a consultant. If the company cannot produce itself, staff should not be in a position of providing the details. We need to analyze the details, and if we're not actually making the calculations, but we want to review how the calculations were made, and do we agree with how they're coming up with the cost benefit. So each company per COMAR 20.50.12 is required to collect outage data to aid in its reliability planning, and they are responsible for using that outage data to understand the benefits of improvements that they're making. I feel like when a company does tree trimming, they should be looking, both pre and post tree trimming, and analyzing what the reliability impacts are, and refining their cost benefit analysis, and that's what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to understand, what is the impact of Delmarva's reliability programs, and how are they determining that, and how are they applying it to their reliability planning. And we would like to have a more granular, bottoms-up view of how the reliability plan is made.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the questions I have.
All right, thank you. Mr. Paradown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barkowski, good morning. I trust you survived well your stint at MEMA in the Emergency Operations Center.
I will say we did that virtually. I should have said that in our emails, but yes, we did.
Well, we're glad you're here. I wanted to ask you about the testimony, Mr. Zhang's testimony on page 8. And it deals with table 4, and it's kind of the same line of questioning, but I want to make sure I understand it. The top, those lines 1 through 8, I suppose. And so I don't mischaracterize the testimony, I'll just read it. As can be seen on the far right column from 2015 to 2020, the ratio per customer spend and safety improvements for PEPCO is projected to be about a third of DPLs. In essence, it can be interpreted that PEPCO is reaping approximately 3 times, $5,705 divided by $1,911, the benefits of a reliability program as DPL per dollar spent. Was that statement in the table 4 after the errata was submitted? Is this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would say that if we were to do that calculation before the errata was submitted, they would be much more similar, because in general the reliability benefits, and I can go through in granular detail if you want to go down that road, but in general they were reduced by about 2/3. So if you were going to buy something and you agreed to get 30 widgets for what you're going to pay, and then you turn around and somebody's saying, well, you're only going to get 10 widgets now, that raises a flag, and that's essentially what led us down that path.
Okay. Well, and you still had a comfort level, engineering staff still had a comfort level to sign off on this agreement with that kind of glaring concern?
Yes. Well, in witness Zong's direct testimony, we had originally recommended a disallowance, but when you got down to the disallowance that we recommended, it ended up being very small, and it's just one of those other factors that and again, I wasn't the cook as far as, determining, the end results of the settlement as far as the dollar amounts, but I think, those factors, were discussed briefly, and it wasn't going to be a large material, dollar amount impact the original disallowance that we had recommended.
So this work group we've been talking about, engineering will lead it, staff will lead the work group. Is that correct?
Staff will convene it. We're hoping that Delmarva goes off and produces an initial analysis for us to review, and at that point, we would decide how to proceed further. They indicate they have a good story to tell, and I personally believe that they probably do have a story to tell. When I look at their reliability program, I see a lot of aging infrastructure replacement and things like that yield comparatively lower reliability benefit per spend than maybe some of their other programs, like poorest performing feeder and things of that nature. So I'm hoping that they can parse out and help us to understand better, and I think that's their goal also. But I can say the way the programs are categorized at this point, there's just not enough transparency on that to make staff comfortable.
And do you foresee the possibility, because this is the only area of the settlement that I've saw or heard here today, where there was maybe a somewhat of a at least nuanced difference of opinion in the characterization of what this all means. Do you foresee that you may not agree with whatever PEPCO, I mean, is this going to be an iterative work group, or you're just going to convene it and then they're going to go off with their consultant and send you a report? How's this going to
well, and you bring up an excellent point. I recall your questioning Witness McGowan on what if consensus is not reached. I don't see in the end that consensus is the overarching goal of this, because the overarching goal of this work group is to allow staff to have enough visibility on Delmarva's reliability plan to be a factor in the next rate case. So if we don't agree in the end, we will we'll have a lot more data to be able to support our positions in the next rate case. So to me, consensus is important. It would be great if we all walked away in alignment, but if it isn't, I don't see that as necessarily a deal breaker type of thing, or something that is the ultimate goal of this work group.
Yeah, I mean, should I as a commissioner be concerned that my staff has this concern, and if you still have this concern after this work group that ratepayers are going to pay for to the tune of $150,000 consultant, should I have a concern that ratepayers are paying for something and staff still doesn't agree that the reliability spends are correct?
Well, I have an opinion on that, and I expressed that opinion to Delmarva in some of the settlement discussions. I think in the end they might benefit, even if we weren't asking them, they might benefit from a reliability consultant. I feel like if we have enough concerns that cause us to go down that road, then obviously we're concerned about their reliability planning, and they may benefit from a consultant. So I don't feel like it's money thrown away. I feel like it's something that would be of value to them.
Is it fair to say that reliability spending is a significant part of this agreed-upon settlement rate increase?
Could you repeat that?
Would it be fair to say that reliability spending is a significant part of this settlement rate increase?
Well, and again, I'm not the numbers guy, but I think the reason why we continue to have rate cases is because of reliability spend, and that's again why staff is raising this issue. because we want to get a better handle on it, given, the metrics that we've looked at. And I do a follow-up to your other question. I'm not sure if I answered it. In the end, the report will be to the work group, but staff will make a point to, send that report with our comments to the commission. So you will, at the end, have the opportunity to hear our comments on it.
On that point, do you think it should be filed as part of the public record with the commission?
Yeah, I haven't really considered that. I'd have to give that some thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Commissioner Linton.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, Mr. Borkowski.
Morning.
Thanks for stepping in for Mr. Zhang, who I'm sure is very pleased to be elsewhere at this time. Just a quick question for you regarding page 10 of the testimony. I asked a question of Mr. McGowan earlier regarding the trigger component for the hiring of a consultant in the work group. There's the if-then statement there on page 10, line 21, where it basically suggests that if DPL is unable to provide sufficient transparency, then goes on to say that the consultant will be retained. When I asked the question of Mr. McGowan, of course he stated that they had a good story to tell and that they would obviously be preparing some information for the staff. So what I wanted to know was if there was any other reason that the staff would pursue now where there would still be a need for a consultant, assuming that the company is able to produce the transparency that the staff is looking for.
If Delmarva is able to provide the transparency that staff is looking for, yeah, we would not need a consultant.
Okay.
And staff is hoping we don't need a consultant. Just for the record, we're hoping we can do this without a consultant.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borkowski. Appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
All right, let me ask the parties whether you have anything else to bring before us today as part of the settlement here.
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor. This concludes staff's evidence.
None for OPC.
All right, very good. I want to thank all the parties for your work in this settlement and for your testimony today. Very much appreciated. The Commission will try to act as quickly as we can on ruling on this settlement, and we thank you for all your efforts. With that, we are adjourned.